Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to this webinar. My name is Stijn Daniels, and on behalf of ICTCT, I will be the host of the webinar today. Most welcome to Torkel Bjørnskau, our lecturer speaker, joining us from Oslo in Norway. Before we start, a couple of practical things. First, a bit of publicity for some oncoming activities of ICTCT. First of all, the AfroSafe conference that will be held in June 26 in Lusaka in Zambia. Call for abstracts is open now, so please consider going there and submitting some of your work. Then we can already announce that our next annual conference as ICTCT will be in Zagreb in Croatia in October next year. The call for abstracts is not yet available, but will appear early 26. So for those who are planning their next year already, please note these dates in your agenda and consider publishing and presenting something at our annual conference. Good. And in any case, but I think that's not really the problem for most of the people who are attending the session today. Register at ictct.net if you want to stay informed about our activities. It's my honor to introduce the speaker of today. Torkel Bjørnskau is a very well experienced researcher at the TOI, the Transport Economic Institute in Oslo, in Norway. And I learned, I didn't know that, but actually his PhD was about game theory. And it's very interesting to hear about his work on that in relation to understanding road user behavior. Before we actually start the session, a couple of practical things. The idea is that we have a lecture of around 40 minutes with some 10 to 15 minutes time for questions and answers. So the whole session will be done in an hour. That's the aim, and we will be quite strict about that. If you have questions, just put your name in the chat, and the session, the Q&A session will be moderated by Alexei Lorishin, and you will be called to ask your question or to raise your point if there would be too many people who want to take the floor. Good. Just don't forget that by registering for this session, you agreed to be recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, just put your camera off. But apart from that, we prefer that you keep yourself visible for this webinar. It's much more nice to the speaker and to the other attendees. Good. And that's it. So please, Torkel, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Stein. Very nice to be here, and very nice to be able to present this topic, which is really something I have worked a lot on. So this is very brief, the outline of this talk. It's what this game theory, why I started studying this, and why it's useful, and what it is, and why it's useful for road safety studies in general. And here you can see James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. He plays the game of chicken. Maybe seen him. Chicken is not a very typical game graphically. But anyway, if you wonder who this is, this was me back in the late 80s or beginning of the 90s. I don't really know. I studied political science at the University of Oslo. I had a degree in 1985, and then I started at the TOI in January 1986. At the time, we had a very strong road safety research department, and My colleague Rune Elvik, he was already there. He had started working on the handbook of road safety measures. And we had psychologists, engineers, sociologists, political scientists, and quite a strong research group, I would say. And we also had quite decent funding. That was the good thing in those days. We had much more money to do good research than we have nowadays. So I started there, and then I had the opportunity to have a scholarship to have a PhD study or doctoral study, and then I studied game theory and to use that to study road traffic and interaction. So that's briefly the background. So why? This was really the reason why is mainly because I was a political scientist, and I was used to game theory from that field, and I thought it could be interesting to apply. Road safety research in the late 1980s, we had a very strong traffic engineering tradition already. You recognize perhaps this guy. This is William Hudden, who was the first administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Authority in the US, and he was installing barriers and regulations about barriers in only cars in the 60s. So he was really maybe the first to apply a system approach in road safety. So we had dual braking systems, you had different types of equipment in cars, seatbelts, of course. So that was very important, but that was very mechanical for us. It was engineering. And in this system approach, we speak about interaction, but the interaction one speaks of is really just about the interaction between the elements in the system, like the driver, the car, and the road. There's no focus on interaction between the road user and its perspective. And then, as you know, you remember all this figure and also the picture. This guy we all know. He had started this conflict studies in Sweden, and here you have interaction between road users, but this interaction is also quite mechanical. We had this strong traffic psychology tradition in the 80s, and you had Kåre Ruma from Sweden and these guys, I mentioned them. And the models, this is very typical. They were very concerned about information processing, cognitive loads, etc. And this was also very much in line with the system theoretic approach, because in the system theory, human is vulnerable, makes mistakes, and they were looking into what kind of processing of information did they do and where did the mistakes come from. You also had hazard perception tests, etc. And then you had another tradition in psychology at that time. Then you had this motivational, and that was kind of a reaction to the system approach. These guys, Gerald Wilde, I think you know him. he was maybe the one really putting things on fire back in those days. He was because it was not only that the motivation was important. He also said that the motivation for road users is not really to not have accidents or not to have risks. He said that people, in fact, they have a target level of risk. They have some level of risk that they really like to have. That was quite opposite of what Netten and Sumala and Ray Fuller advocated. They both advocated that people really don't want to experience risk in traffic. So anyway, a big discussion also between engineers and these psychologists, especially Gerald Wilde. So then we had motivation, which I thought was lacking. Netten and Sumala, they say this, the driver's role as an active creator of the traffic situation he's faced with has not been given satisfactory notice, and consequently the decision-making aspect of traffic behavior has not received research interest in proportion to its importance to road safety. So And this was actually, this was back in 1976. So these guys were really ahead of their time. But this was very typical for the 1980s. You had this motivational reaction in road safety research. So this focus on motivation, that was okay, and I was very much into that, but still there was no focus on interaction. How do people actually interact in road traffic? That was really not something people studied very much. So, and it was interesting because as a social scientist, I knew that there were quite a lot of social scientists that were studying interaction, micromobility interactions with more qualitative approaches, like this guy, Erving Goffman. He's a sociologist from Canada and the US. And he wrote this book, Relations in Public, back in 1971. And here you can actually see that he is very much into this type of behavior that is typical for a game theoretic approach. Because he writes like, but not allowing pedestrians to catch his eye, a driver can keep them in a hesitant condition. So he's into this kind of bargaining, negotiation thing in traffic. And by failing to read the course sign that has been pointedly given to him, one driver can force another driver to fall back or accept a chicken challenge. And also by catching the eye of a driver, another can gesture a request. For example, to cut into a line of cars from a side road or pull out into traffic, for which no effective body gesture is available. So there were these guys, social scientists, that really used traffic as examples of interaction. But there were no researchers within the traffic research community, as far as I knew, who did the same, who was really looking into this. So, and I think that one of the reasons was that one didn't really have a good analytic tool to study that kind of interaction. And then I thought that this game theory could really be interesting to try to apply to road user interaction. Bjørn Elster is at least in Norway, he's an international known philosopher, perhaps more known in Norway, but anyway, he was he stated that game theory could be a very solid micro foundation for the study of social structure. He was very much into what you call he looked into mechanism to explain how conventions, how patterns of behavior develops, and that is something that game theory can provide explanations and model. And as I said, there was these are textbooks of game theory, and you can see they're quite old. The Strategy of Conflict by Thomas Schelling is from 1960, and this the other book, Games as Models of Social Phenomena, is from 1979 or something. In both these books, road traffic is used as examples of games. So that was interesting as a point of departure for me. So what is it then, please? A game in this sense is a situation where two or more decision makers, often called players, interact, and the outcome for each depends both on their own choices and the choices of others. So each player has a set of possible actions, strategies they can choose from. And they try to maximize benefit or minimize loss. Next. And because everyone's outcome depends on everyone else's decisions, players must act upon beliefs about what others will do. So game theory studies how people behave in such interactive situations, predicting when they cooperate, when they compete, and how stable patterns of behavior, called equilibria in game theory, can emerge. This theory of games started with a very formal mathematical flavor with this book was really the starting point, Theory of Games and Economic Behavior from 1944 by John von Neumann and Oscar Morgenstern, and this was very mathematical and with very strict assumptions about perfect rationality, everyone, complete information. So this was in a way a branch of mathematics more than a model to study behavior. So the solutions here could actually be deduced, and a typical example of this kind of approach is when you play chess. Nowadays, for instance, Magnus Carlsen, the former Norwegian champion and world champion, he's not so fond of the traditional chess anymore because you can always have computers to deduce what is the best outcome. So you don't really need to play the game anymore. So this is kind of the thing that was in this flavor of game theory. So, but at the time, there was another more dynamic behavioral game theory tradition coming on the scene, and this guy Robert Sugden, he was quite influential for me actually, because this book is very nice, and he was the first actually, as I can remember, who really studied road traffic interaction by the use of game theoretic models. So next, please. And he says, if I'm to explain these phenomena, social conventions, as the product of game-playing behavior, I need a theory of how people actually play games. Any assumption I make about behavior must be ones that most human beings act on in almost all places and times. I can make no use of a concept of rationality that is so sophisticated that ordinary people do not act on unless it has been carefully explained to them. So in the traditional game theory, the strategy is so sophisticated, and so you cannot really assume that people can actually follow the logic. So now why is this type of game theory useful for us? It can help us, and I will now try to give some examples of how it can be used. One example is the collapse of the right-hand give-away rule that we had in Norway and in many countries, I think. And then we have a situation also in Norway, perhaps also in Sweden, perhaps also other places, where you see that the behavior of cyclists at zebra crossings is counter to the rule. They are not behaving as the traffic rule says, and so the solution is not in accordance with the traffic rules. Also, the interactions of automated vehicles and normal road users can be interesting, can be studied by use of these type of models. And the fourth, we will see if we manage to go through that. But the convention of dipping headlights is also something that's interesting to study by use of game theory. So I'll try to go through these four, and we'll see. The basic game in traffic is a game called Leader. It's also called Crossroads by this Robert Sugden I just referred to. You have two cars, and they have two options. Car A and car B, and they are approaching this intersection, and the problem is really have to agree upon who's going to drive and who's going to stop. It's a very simple model, this, and driver A has two options and driver B has two options. And if both drive, next please, then you have this outcome, which is the worst outcome for both. So 4 is the best, 1 is the worst. And this number in the upper right-hand side of the cell is the value of payoff to B, whereas the number in the left, on the left side, is the payoff to A. So here, both get the worst outcome. So if both drive, then it's a poor outcome. And next place, if both stop, it's also a very poor outcome, because then you just have to renegotiate the whole thing. Now, in this situation, if B drives, then A can choose, should I drive or should I stop? And it's obviously best for A to stop if B drives. And the opposite, if B stops, it's of course much better for A to drive than to stop. And the same is this is symmetrical, so the same goes for B. So if A drives, it's best to stop, and if B stops, it's best to drive. And if you, so now you have two solutions that is equilibria in this game over here. This one and this one. One stops and one drives. That's the best solution, of course. But again, you have the problem of, agreeing on who is going to drive, who is going to stop. So we can model this in a more dynamic way if you go to the next. And here, this is the same game, but here we have modeled it as a game where you have a sequence of moves. So in this outline, A has the first move advantage. He can choose whether to drive or stop. And then B can see what has A done, and then he has to choose to drive or to stop. So obviously, if this is the case, then A will choose to drive, and B will have no other option than to stop. So you'll have, if you go to the next, Alexei, and the next, and the next, then you will have this outcome. So the point here is really, this is of course very simple, but the point here is really that if A, for some reason, can signal to B that he is committed to drive, he cannot stop, or he has a reputation of always driving in these situations, then they can kind of force B to stop. And we know that I have studied this, and we know there are reputations of how drivers behave out in the traffic. And at least in Norway, people were very skeptical towards taxi drivers in the old days because they were very aggressive in traffic. Used to be. I don't think that's the case anymore. But anyway, if you have a reputation or you have this first mover advantage, then you can force B to stop in this situation. Now, so this is just a model, and this is a very general model. So if you now go on to study it, this is, now I'm going to try to use this model to try to explain why the right-hand rule in these intersections collapsed in Norway and in other countries, because it did. The priority rules in Norway, back in the days, it was, if you go on, in 1912, right-hand rule, and you had to signal with the horn. The speed limit was 35 kilometers per hour, and you should at maximum have 12 kilometers per hour at intersections. So it was the right-hand rule. And I've read through these member magazines of these car associations at the time. And it says that the practice has incorporated itself that one now stops and waits for all traffic from the right if one is in the slightest way bothers or inhibits this. So people were very, very much following this right-hand rule. That was in 1934. So if you go on. So what people did, if you remember this model, they did in order to make sure that people actually stopped those not coming from the right-hand side. They use signals. And if you go on, this is a quote. The chauffeurs often shot like rockets across streets and intersections without the slightest reduction in speed, limiting themselves only to giving one or more blasts of the horn. This is a description of how this game was, the solution of this game was in those days. This is in the 1930s. And this was the same in Norway, in Sweden, in Finland, in most countries. And it actually, because there was so much noise, because all this blasting of the horns, that there was this movement coming, I think it came from Finland and Sweden to Norway, about the silent traffic. So at this date, we are not supposed to use the horns anymore. That was decided by the municipalities and the cities in the 30s, in several cities, both in Sweden, Norway, Finland, and other places. So this was a problem, and this was the solution, to use the horn. And so it worked, kind of. And if you go on, what happened was that in the 30s, General Motors launched new models of cars with lots of more powerful engines with higher speeds. I don't know if you're aware of, but the T-Ford was, the black T-Ford was not really, was the same, the model from 1919 was it was the same as 10 years later, it didn't change, it was black. Whereas General Motors, they came with new models every year. They had much more power. They had colors. You can see if you had a new model or not. So this was really a big revolution in the car industry. And what happened, because these cars, they had so much power, so the speed limits increased from, in Norway, 45 kilometers per hour to 60 kilometers per hour. And then what happened was that this is 1937. So most countries are now in the process of arranging systems for yielding for traffic from larger roads, legalizing a sort of pre-established practice. This was in 1937. This happened. And if you go on, we had this right-hand rule and signal with horn back in 1912. And what happened was, if you go on, since the speed increased that much on these roads, just go on. B drivers in this situation, they discovered that A drivers on the largest roads were often not able to stop in the intersections, even if B came from the right-hand side. So it came as a convention or as a rule to yield for traffic from the larger road. This was kind of a gentleman's rule, which was also formalized in Norway in the 50s. But the most often one adopted give-way rules and priority signs, and this was happening all over Europe at the time, because this car revolution happened all over Europe. So the practice, the rules for yielding was installed many places and quite different. So this is an example of how this game changed because of the one actor, the cars from A suddenly had higher speeds. Okay, let's move on. The next game I want to show you is the zebra crossing game. This is a game where cyclists are crossing the street in zebra crossings. And as you can see in the picture, this is how they should do that according to the rules. If the cars should yield, if the cyclists cycle over, then the rules in Norway is that the cyclists should yield. Next slide, please. So before 1998, this was not the case. You had the right-hand rule, and vehicles turning, they had to give way to those going straight. So in many cases, car drivers had to yield to cyclists cycling over the pedestrian crossing or zebra crossings. And in Norway, it is allowed to cycle on the sidewalks, pavements. So many people use them for cycling. And so zebra crossings were also quite a lot in use. After 1998, the rules changed. Cyclists entering or crossing the street from a pavement or cycling lane has to yield to traffic in the street. So cyclists to cycle over a zebra crossing must yield to the cars, but the cars must yield to pedestrians. This is the rule from 1998, still the rule today. So please go on. So here we can have, this is also a kind of a leader game. You can model this situation as a leader game. And here it's modeled with the cyclist having kind of a first mover advantage. So the cyclist, he has three options here. He can cycle, not stopping on the cycle. He can yield, and he can step off the cycle and walk over the pedestrian crossing. The driver, he has two options. He can drive or he can yield. And then you have, on the right-hand side, you have a lot of numbers here, and you can see this is the payoffs to the cyclist and the drivers for the different outcomes. So just click one. This payoff is the worst for the cyclist. 1 is the worst outcome, 6 is the best. And this is obvious because the cycle cycles, the driver drives, so the cyclist is hit by the driver, by the car. And this is also a very bad outcome for the driver. The solution, according to the rules, should be, if you click the next, should be this one. The cyclist yield, the driver drives. And then you have an outcome, which is the best for the driver, his best outcome. And it's okay to the cyclist, but maybe you can improve this by doing something else. So in this situation, the cyclist sees that, okay, this is not the best solution for me. If I, in my first move, choose to walk instead, then I can realize a better outcome, because then the driver, the cars have to stop for me. So if it does that, you will have this, if you click on the next, you will have this solution, which is much better for the cyclist. He walks, the cars must yield. And but given that you have this solution, it is actually better for both parties that the cycle cycles and the driver yields. So given this solution, it is much better for both to have the next solution, this solution, because it takes much less time for both the cyclist and the driver, which when the cyclist cycled over the pedestrian crossing or zebra crossing. So according to this model, if it's correct, this should be the outcome in these situations. And we studied this. So if you move on to see, is this actually the case? And here you can see this is very close to where I live. This is a pedestrian crossing, zebra crossing. The zebras are not very visible, but anyway. And just click on the movie and we'll see what happens. You can see the car approaching, and yeah, it wasn't so easy to see, but anyway, you saw that the car stopped for the cyclist. And if you move on to the next, this is another place where you have a zebra crossing, and you can see clearly that the car is stopping for the cyclist. And this is very typical, and I don't know if you noticed, but this cyclist, he was also giving a signal to the driver. So what happens here is that you have some kind of active negotiations between them, and both parties know that, okay, the cyclist, he can just step off, and then I have to stop anyway. So it's better that he just cycles over. So this is the case in Norway, and I have done countings of this. So if you go to the next, I will show you. Here are lots of bars, but if you see these on the left, the first one on the far left is not so interesting for us now, but Tåsen, that was one of the movie clips. And you see the green bars, they show the proportion or share of interactions where the car yields. And it varies from 74%, 72%, 84%, etc. So it's a very clear picture that the car yields to the cyclists. And also at Ullevål, which is the other square with the red line, you have a similar proportions, 78% or something, of the cases, the car yields to the cycle. And it's interesting because you see that, there is these small orange bars, which are around 5% or something. That is when the cyclist dismounts or walks instead. And I think that you need to have a small proportion of that in order to have the drivers remembering that this is in fact an option. So they want to avoid this, that the cycle walk. So they try to yield, and this is normally what happens. And I can show you another example of this, which is quite interesting. If you look at this, you can see there are cyclists coming from both sides, cars. Now it's something wrong here. Okay. Can you see the movie? Yeah. Okay. I think this is also kind of interesting with respect to the safety number effect, because what we see here is that when the first cyclist has negotiated this kind of right of way, every cyclist following him can just use the solution already negotiated, so they don't need to negotiate again. So this is just I think that is one important aspect of the safety number effect that we often see for vulnerable road users and cyclists. Okay, so please move on. The conclusion in this game is that car drivers yield to cyclists as they do to pedestrians. We have very active negotiations, eye contact, signaling. And the solution we see in real life is very much in line with this model that I showed you. So there is a convention or norm established here, and this is contrary to the rules, which is quite interesting. And we didn't see very much conflict, really. There are some drivers that still think that this is a very bad solution and blast their horns and so on, but that is very seldom in Norway now. Okay, to the next. Let's see. This is perhaps interesting to you. Many people work with automated vehicles these days, and here you can see a picture of a shuttle in Oslo. I don't know if you remember this shuttle, Alexei, but this was running in Oslo for some time, and do you see this matrix? I don't see it because now there is a problem with the internet again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. This is exactly the same model matrix that I showed you earlier. So if you just click on this quickly, you see this. They are the same mechanisms here, the same equilibrium points. A or B must stop, and the other must drive. This is the solution. And as I showed you, you can have a dynamic type of modeling of this if you go through the next. And we saw that if A can signal clearly that he's going to drive, he cannot stop, then B is forced to stop. But what is quite interesting is that if A signals very clearly that he is going to stop, to just go on, or has a reputation of stopping, then B is very confident that he can drive. So then you have this solution where B drives and A stops, which is the best solution for B. So please move on. So this is in 2016 there were lots of optimism about autonomous vehicles, and people thought they would be in the streets before 2020, etc. But he had this other perspective, so because he said that because these autonomous vehicles are so safety-oriented and so drive so defensively, when other road users experience that, they will understand that, okay, these AVs, they will stop in every situation where there's the slightest risk of collision. So then I can just walk, or I can cycle, or I can drive in front of it. And that would be a very bad situation for all the autonomous vehicles, of course. If you go on. So we try to study this a bit quick there, okay? But that's okay. We have tried to study this, and this is a video clip from one pilot in Norway. And here you can see that all the cars, they just ignore here they should yield to the bus because the bus comes from the right-hand side or the shuttle, but it doesn't yield. And also another one. Please move on. Here's another you can see it comes from the left. And this car doesn't yield. So we had quite a number of situations where this happened, that ordinary drivers, they didn't yield to the shuttle when they were supposed to do so. Now, this was in a very local community, so they were quite, they met this shuttle many times, so they got to know it, and they understood that this was this reaction of the shuttle very much. So if you move on, there is also some quite recent support of this, that people ignore or bully or whatever you can call them. Sina Nordhoff and Marian and colleagues, they have studied this in the US, where you have had autonomous vehicles for some time. And some of the people are saying things like this. It's very easy to cut them off. They will stop. If you need to merge, you're like, oh, there's a robot car. I can definitely merge in front of that robot car. Or if you're a pedestrian and you're like, they're going to stop for me because they see you. They see you coming. And next. It's gotten really fun to play with them. If you try to bluff them, you can make them stop or clinch. You see one coming along and you wait until the last second and step off the curb. That's enough to stop them. The human drivers are going to dominate them. This is something that another says. But these are just scattered evidence of this happening. And many people are not really trusting them to stop. So in order for this game to be the model, in order for this to operate as in the model, people must be certain that the autonomous vehicle will stop in every risky situation. And that is not the case today. So we don't really see that this is really a big problem. But if the technology is going to be that good and people discover it, then perhaps this solution that the AVs will have problem in getting ahead is going to materialize. We will see. Now I see it's 10 to... We had some technical problems. I think I will... I think I will have to drop the next example. Just click on this. I'll just briefly and one. Okay. Now, the point with this is really that you have now I don't see this in presentation mode.
Yep.
There it goes. Yeah, this is another type of game, and it's the point here was really that we learn at the driving schools now that the normal practice when you drive in the dark is that you use full lights less than what you're supposed to do, and people normally, as it's this is in the book called
The Road to a Driver's License. This is a textbook for driver education from 1976, where it says, it has been common practice to switch to dipped headlights when an oncoming car also does so. You should not follow this habit, however, because many drivers tend to switch far too early while the vehicles are still a long distance apart. And that's true. People tend to switch to low lights when there are maybe 300 meters between the cars. Next, please. What's interesting is that this book had the exact same wording in 1995, almost 20 years later. So thousands of new drivers have entered the traffic with this knowledge, but then nothing has changed. And that's interesting. So we can just jump to the conclusion, really, because the reason here is that this is very interesting, because when you have this kind of a play where you play this game with the same opponent over time, then you can actually learn and sanction each other. And what happened with all these new drivers, just go ahead, is that they were sanctioned very heavily. Yeah, okay, I will just read this. The driver education tries to teach drivers to use full lights more than what's normal, okay? But these attempts have not succeeded because the novice drivers entering the driver population constitute a very small minority of drivers. So they are sanctioned by flashing headlights on the roads when they try to use this practice they learned in driving schools. And then they adjust their behavior to normal practice. So if a large number of drivers, novice drivers, had entered the population at the same time, there might be a different convention establishing. But we have the same, or at least we had the same pattern. So it didn't succeed in changing the convention. Now you maybe have automated dipping systems. I don't know, but this was at least the case, and we have quite good empirical support for this happening with surveys to drivers in at different times. Okay. There are a lot of my colleague Rune, he did this review of game models, and there are lots of them eventually, quite a number. This was in 2014. A couple of these models we have looked into, and here there are lots of others. And so that's a nice review. And I also asked our friend ChatGPT about recent publications in the field, and this is just a list. You're not supposed to read this, but you can see there are quite a lot, and there are quite a number of contributions about autonomous vehicles. Okay, I will just sum up very briefly. What we see is that we have patterns of behavior, culture, conventions that develop through interaction. We saw the give way rule for traffic from the right-hand side collapsed. Go on, please. Car drivers yield to cyclists at zebra crossings. Autonomous vehicles, well, they might meet some challenges in mixed traffic because they have this commitment to stop. And then finally, this game, dipping headlights game, where novice drivers act according to normal behavior, not according to what they have been taught in the driving schools. I will show you a favorite clip at the end, Alexei. This you remember, I think. This is a very tough brinkmanship, or this is a tough guy playing a game. And here is... so if you act as you're absolutely crazy, you can have others stopping for you. That's one lesson to learn from this. Okay, thank you. I have a list of references at the end, which is not shown here, but I can send it to you if you like.
Thank you, Torkel. I would say immediately we go to Alexei.
Yes. Okay, there were no questions. There were some comments about how to solve technical issues. How many engineers we need to get a presentation
Yeah,
right?
I'm very sorry about this because suddenly the internet was down here and in the middle of this, so we had
Yeah. So
problems.
yeah, we still have about less than 5 minutes, so
Yeah.
we might have time for 1 or 2 questions. But if you have a question, please write it in the chat. But what I would want to ask you, so the autonomous vehicles, yes, it is very defensive in its behavior. And the vehicle itself cannot do much to the aggressive driver, bullying it. But there are passengers inside. And they might get quite upset. So what do you think? Wouldn't that kind of affect the aggressiveness? I mean, they still can show like that and swear and show fingers.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I remember we actually considered that because we thought that, okay, these shuttles, who will use them? They go in 6 kilometers per hour. The ones using them are perhaps elderly people, people that, yeah. So kind of weak and vulnerable road users. So maybe people would take notice to that and behave more polite because they know that the passengers are those kind of people. I don't know. But then that is the study from the US was really robot taxis, and then you can just imagine that other people don't care really. So I don't know. I think it's very interesting. I think that maybe perhaps the technology will never be perfect enough to this have this game solution materializing because but if people completely trust that this vehicle will stop, then I think there will be a problem. So we will see.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
No questions. But I can send if anyone wants to have. Now you have the slides, really, Alexei. So you can just make a PDF of
we
it
can
and
share
send
it,
to
yes,
people.
on the webinar page.
Yeah.
Mm. Okay, and then we are perfectly on time, Stein. So it's up to you again.
Okay, thank you. Then we are at the end of the webinar. We are perfectly well on time. Thank you, Torkel, for the interesting insights after a couple of technical issues, but eventually it was a very interesting story and talk about game theory. Thank you all for being with us today and see you soon at one or another ICTCT event. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.